In lessons 11 to 13, we've created 5 different graphical user interfaces, and we changed the properties of our components in design time. In other words, in Delphi's integrated development environment. None of these programs are functional though. They are just graphics on a screen and your users can view them, but nothing happens when they type text into edits or when they click on the buttons. In this lesson you will learn how to write code for your program so that your users can interact with your applications. For now, I'm really going to take it slow. I will not type as fast as Bob is doing there on the screen. I want you to follow what I'm demonstrating and to imitate what I'm doing. Do it exactly the way that I'm doing it. And if I'm still going too fast, pause the video and make sure you understand the concepts. With this lesson, we kick off with the most basic programming statements. So it is important that you understand and practice the code so that you are ready for more advanced stuff later on. In the previous lesson, I asked you to create 4 programs. If you have not done that, then you will not be able to complete this lesson. So please, watch lesson 13 again and create the 4 programs. I saved the 4 programs in a folder that I created on my desktop in lesson 8. So I will open that folder. It is called Delphi Schools Video Projects. In this folder you can see the folders that I created for all my applications, including a folder that I use for pictures. We created the first demonstration application in the beginning of the video series. The contact information application was created in lesson 11 and 12, and we created the other 4 applications in lesson 13. For the purpose of this lesson, we will use the program called translation. So double-click the translation folder to open it. In this folder we see quite a few files. In lesson 8 and 9 we learned that Delphi generates these files for our applications. But we also learned that we are responsible for naming and saving the program's unit file and the project file. I asked you to save the project file as translation_p. Double-click on that file to open the project in Delphi's IDE. If the project opens with the code editor on top, just click the form's title bar to shift the focus to the form. Now let's see what we have here. In the panel on the right hand side of the form, we have a few buttons and bit buttons. In this lesson we are only interested in the first 2 buttons. That is the English and Afrikaans buttons. This is what we want to happen. When your user clicks on the Afrikaans button, the first name and surname labels as well as the title of the form must change to Afrikaans. And if the user clicks on the English button, the captions must translate back to English. Your users can only make these changes when clicking on the buttons. Remember, they do not have Delphi installed on their computers, so they do not have the object inspected to change the captions. To enable your users to change the captions to a different language, you must write code to make it happen. The code that you write will only execute while the program is running and when the user clicks the button. When changing properties such as captions in code, we say that we are changing the properties in runtime because it will change while the program is running. Just a few tips before we write the code. First, ask yourself what must change, how must it change, and when must it change. Let's answer those questions for this example. First, what must change? The answer is the caption properties of the form and the 2 labels must change. Secondly, how must it change? And the answer is the captions must change to another language. Thirdly, when must it change? The answer is the captions must change to Afrikaans when the user clicks the Afrikaans button, and the captions must change to English when the user clicks on the English button. By answering the what, how and when questions, we ascertained that the buttons must do the processing. In other words, we must write code for the buttons. We also established that the code will execute when the user clicks on a button. When the user clicks a button, an interaction is taking place. The user asks for something to happen, and if the button has code, it will respond. We call that interaction an event. The default event that occurs for a button is its click event. That is what I meant when I said that Delphi is an event-driven programming language at the beginning of this video series. Other components also have default events. For example, the form has an event that is triggered when a form is loaded in runtime. Another thing about events, almost all our components can respond to more than one event. For example, a button's default event occurs when it is clicked by using the left mouse button, but you can also write code that must execute when the user clicks on the right mouse button. There are also some other ways that the user can interact with your components to invoke events. For example, by moving the mouse or by pressing a key on the keyboard. However, none of these events will be triggered if you do not write code for it to happen. You will learn more about different events in a future lesson, so let's get back to this example. Let's first run the application to see what the user will experience if we don't write code for the buttons. Click the Run button in the speed bar or press the F9 key on your keyboard. The application is now in runtime. At the moment, the captions of the form and the two labels are in English. That is how we set it up in design time. Now you can type text into the edits and click on the English button. Nothing happens. Also click on the Afrikaans button. Still nothing. The display button will also do nothing, and if you click on the reset button, everything stays the same. However, the close button does something. Yay, at least something works. The form just closed. The reason for that is because the Delphi creators were so kind to provide built-in functionality or predefined code for a bit button if its kind property is set to BK close. But they can't do that for all our buttons, because they don't know what we want to achieve with our buttons. I don't think any of them even know how to speak Afrikaans. So although they can do many things, they can't do everything. Okay, we are back in design time, so let's continue. We already established that we must write code to change the captions of the form and the two labels when the user clicks on the English and Afrikaans buttons. To write code for a component's default event, in this case when a button is clicked, all you need to do is double click on the component while your program is in design time. So let's go ahead and double click on the Afrikaans button. Delphi opens the code editor window, but it also added some code for us. That is also neat. We don't have to do all the coding. We call this code the event procedure or the event handler. The event handler is a framework that Delphi creates. This framework provides the skeleton that we will use to write our own code logic. Please don't make changes on any of the code that Delphi generates for you. Let's quickly analyze this framework that Delphi creates for us. On the first line is the procedure header. It starts with the word procedure to indicate that this is a procedure. The TFRM translation is something that you will learn about later. For now, all you have to know that it refers to the parent, which is the form. The following word is BTN Afrikaans click. That indicates to Delphi that this event procedure is for the component called BTN Afrikaans and that this procedure must execute when BTN Afrikaans is clicked. For now, that is the only part that is important to you. This will enable you to identify for which components and events you are writing code. Can you now see why it is so important to assign proper names for your components? If the button's name was still button 2, we will not know that we are writing code for the Afrikaans button. The part between the brackets refers to the component that calls this event handler to execute. In this case, only BTN Afrikaans will call this event handler. Therefore, only BTN Afrikaans is the sender. Like I said, that is not really important for the purpose of this lesson. You will learn more about that later. All procedures and event handlers start with a begin statement immediately after the header, and all procedures end with an end statement. These two lines indicates to the Delphi compiler when your custom code starts and when it ends. You must write your code in the blank line between the begin and the end statements. Okay, let's write some code. Type exactly what I'm typing. When the user clicks on the Afrikaans button, we want to change the caption of the first name label to the Afrikaans word naam. You must first type the name of the component that you want to change, in this case LBL first name, then you type a dot and the list of properties and methods of LBL first name pops up. We must change the caption property, so type the first few characters in the property name, in this case CA, and Delphi filters the list of properties so that it only displays properties that start with CA. The caption property is highlighted. In other words, it is selected. Now press the Enter key on your keyboard and Delphi types the word caption out for you. How neat is that? The Delphi creators are even so kind to do a lot of our typing for us. To assign a new value to the caption property in code, we use a colon and equal symbol together. But be careful, there mustn't be a space between the two characters. The two together is known as an assignment operator. After the assignment operator, you must type the new value that you want to assign to the caption property. The Afrikaans word for first name is noemnaam. Because the caption property only accepts text values, you must enclose the value that you assign in single quotation marks. We also call this a string value. To indicate to Delphi's compiler that you are done with this instruction, you must end the line with a semicolon. Now, let's look at that statement again. An easy way to read and understand the meaning of a statement is to read it from the back. In other words, take the word noemnaam and assign it to the caption property of the component called LBL first name. The next instruction that we want Delphi to execute is to change the surname label's caption. It is a good practice to start a new instruction on a new line. So on the next line, type LBL surname, followed by a dot, type CA to filter the list, and press the Enter key to choose the caption property. Type the assignment operator. The Afrikaans word for surname is van. Type that, but remember to enclose the word in single quotation marks. And enter instruction with a semicolon. The form's caption must also be translated. On the next line, type the name of the form, FRM translation, followed by a dot. The list pops up again. Type CA to filter the list and make sure that the caption is selected, and press the Enter key. Type the assignment operator. At the moment, the caption of the form is the English word translation. The Afrikaans word for translation is vertaling. Type that inside single quotation marks and enter instruction with a semicolon. If we look at the object inspector, we see that the caption property of the form is still translation in design time. That is how it will stay, because that is how we set it up. The caption will only change once the user clicks on the button in runtime, and it only changes in memory. As soon as the user closes the form, the new caption goes out of scope, and the next time the user runs the application again, the English caption will display again. Before we test our code, let's read the last two statements from the back. The statement in the middle reads, take the word van and assign it to the caption property of the component called LBL name. The last statement reads, take the word vertaling and assign it to the caption property of the component called FRM translation. Now let's test our code. Run the application. While in runtime, click the Afrikaans button. Look at that. The caption of the form changed to vertaling. The first name's label changed to noemnaam and the surname label changed to van. Because the length of the Afrikaans and English words differ, the two labels are not properly aligned, and that doesn't look nice. Let's go back and write code to align the right edges of the labels when they are translated. Close the form to go back to design time. Go back to the button's click event handler. You can append more instructions directly under the instruction that changes the caption of the form. I prefer to leave a blank line when I write instructions that must do something else. For example, the first three instructions change captions, and the new statements that I want to append must do the alignment of the labels. So I leave a blank line, like starting a new paragraph. In a future lesson, I will teach you more techniques to style your code to make it easier to read. To align my first name label, the next instruction must change the left position of the first name label. Type the name of the label, in this case LBL first name, followed by a dot. Type a few characters to filter the properties in the list. I want to change the left property of the label, so I type LE. Left is highlighted, so I press the Enter key to select it. Type the assignment operator and type 32. Enter statement with a semicolon. The left property is a number that measures the distance from the left side of the form. Or if the component is contained in a different parent like a panel, it measures the distance from the left side of the panel. In this example, the label is contained in a panel. The label's distance from the left side of the panel must therefore change to 32. Also notice that the left property's value is a number. We also call it an integer value. Numeric values are not enclosed in single quotation marks like string values. To align my surname label, the next instruction must also change the left property of that label. Type the name of the label, in this case LBL surname, followed by a dot. Type a few characters to filter the property in the list. I also want to change the left property in this label, so I type LE. Left is highlighted, so I press the Enter key to select it. The Afrikaans word for surname is van. That is much shorter than the word in the other label, so I must align it a little bit further away from the left side of the panel. Let's make it 80. And enter statement with a semicolon. Now let's test the program again. Run the application. Click on the Afrikaans button. That looks much better. The right edges of our two labels are now aligned. Close the form to go back to design time. Now let's also read the last two statements from the back. This instruction reads, take the number 32 and assign it to the left property of the component called LBL first name. The last instruction reads, take the number 80 and assign it to the left property of the component called LBL name. Our application can now translate into Afrikaans, but what if the user wants to translate it back into English? Easy peasy, you must now also write code for the English button. The code will be very similar to the code for the Afrikaans button. The only differences will be the values that you assign, in other words the captions, and the left distances. Let's try that. Click on the title bar of the form to shift focus to it. Then double click on the English button. Delphi generates another event handler. Here we can see that this event handler will handle clicks for the button called BTN English. But what happened to our other event handler? You just scroll up and you will see it. Now let's write code on the blank line between the begin and the end statement to change the captions back to English words. Change LBL first name's caption property to first name. The next line, change LBL surname's caption property to surname. And on the next line, change FRM translation's caption property to translation. Now I also want to change the left property of the label called, now what did I call that label again? What is the name? Okay, I didn't really forget the label's name. But sometimes you work on a project for a few days, and sometimes a lot of time passed since you named your components. And if you work on big programs, you do sometimes forget what you named your components. If that happens, you can switch from the code editor back to the form, select the component and look for the name in the object inspector. However, that is very inconvenient, so let me show you a trick. We learned that our components' names must be descriptive. We also learned that we must use prefixes. If you follow the Hungarian naming convention that I explained in lesson 12, it is easy to apply this trick. According to the Hungarian naming convention, I know that all my labels start with LBL. So I type LBL, but now, because I forgot the rest of the name, I'm stuck. Not really. After typing the prefix, press the Ctrl key and the spacebar simultaneously. A list pops up with all the components that start with LBL, and because I use descriptive names, I can choose the right component. In this case, LBL first name. If you have a long list of names, you can use the up or down arrow keys on your keyboard to highlight the component that you want to use, and then press the Enter key to select it. Delphi then types the whole name. This autocomplete feature that Delphi provides helps us to type faster, and it also prevents us from misspelling component names or to use names that do not exist. After the name, type a dot. Type LE and make sure that the left property is selected in the list, and continue as before to change the left property. Change the left property of LBL first name to 40 and end the statement with a semicolon. On the next line, assign 50 to the left property of LBL surname. Now let's test the application again. Click the Run button in the speed bar. Click the Afrikaans button to translate the captions to Afrikaans. Now click on the English button and observe how the captions change back to English and how the labels are realigned. Click on the Close button to close the form. As you can see, a programmer gives the instructions. A programmer is in full control. If you completed the code that I demonstrated, congratulations to you. You just became a programmer. Before we move on to the next lesson, let's recap what we've learned in this lesson. You learned that the user can change properties by interacting with your program. That can only happen if you write code that must execute when the user interacts with your program. Your users can interact with your program in different ways, for example, by clicking a mouse button or by pressing a key on the keyboard. These events execute code that a programmer types into an event handler. When a programmer double-clicks a component in design time, Delphi generates an event handler in the code editor for the component's default event. An event handler has a procedure header that shows the name of the component and the event that will be triggered. An event handler has a begin and end statement, and a programmer's custom code must be typed between these two statements. Changing properties in code has the following format. You have a component name, followed by a dot, followed by a property name, followed by an assignment operator, followed by a property value, followed by a semicolon. After typing the first few characters of the component's name, you can press the Control key and spacebar simultaneously to invoke Delphi's autocomplete feature. When typing the dot after the component name, Delphi presents its autocomplete feature that lists the available properties for the specific component. The benefit of using autocompletion is that it makes the process of typing code faster. It also prevents a programmer from misspelling names or using names that do not exist. When applying a proper naming convention, autocompletion also assists in identifying components. The assignment operator is a combination of a colon and equal symbol, and it must be typed without a space between the two characters. The property value that you assign must be compatible with the data type of the property that you assign it to. For example, string or text values must be assigned to string properties, and numeric values must be assigned to numeric properties. An example of string properties are captions, and an example of numeric properties are the left properties. String values must be enclosed in single quotation marks, while numeric values are not enclosed in single quotation marks. You must enter instruction or statement with a semicolon to tell the compiler that you are done with the instruction. It is a good practice to type a new instruction on a new line. Always run your program to test your code's behavior. What you experience in runtime is also what your users will experience when they interact with your program. And that concludes this lesson. In the next lesson, we will explore ways and practices to make our code more stylish and easier to read. You will also learn how to document your code so that your teammates or teachers do not have to spend hours to figure out what you are doing.